Hi again. As we know, hindsight interpretation of history is very convenient, and its motives, of course, are often suspect. What I mean is that it's easy to make ourselves look better by making our forebears look worse. And when you've fully imbibed an evolutionary and humanist worldview, you're either consciously or unconsciously looking for or expecting improvements in humankind that the theory is supposed to deliver. An upward climb of Homo sapien into Homo absolutus or Homo perfectus. And when the reality presented to their eyes and senses doesn't conform to the evolutionary narrative, efforts have to be made to pretend that we have improved or that we're bringing about the improvements we think should be occurring, to reverse the deterioration that we see going on around us. We're not able to stop conflict and war. We keep facing new diseases, injustices abound, our prisons are still required and are sometimes overcrowded. As Revelation 6 reveals, the red horse of conflict, the black horse of famine and the pale horse of death still ravage mankind as always, and no evolutionary improvement has stemmed their gallop. Now, this worldview provides an underlying motive for much of the criticism of the past and revision of history that some academics and others are indulging. And rather than admitting to the devolution that's actually occurring, and that there is no evidence for any moral improvement, evidence must be discovered or invented to demonstrate that yes, we are on the upward path. It must therefore be demonstrated that we are so much more righteous, so much more virtuous and advanced than our forebears. The convenient way to do this is to point self-righteously to the sins, real or imagined, of our forebears. Naturally, having uncovered these sins of the fathers, the next step is the pretense that we are now morally superior, and even to feign moral outrage or tell people we must apologize for the sins of our fathers. That's not to say that recognition may not sometimes be necessary, but the pretense that we are now morally improved and superior is a classic deception. By way of example, in the days of the Old Testament, let's say in the time of Jeroboam of Israel, whom the Bible unflatteringly informs us caused Israel to sin, the heathen nations to whom Israel was called to demonstrate the light of government under the one true God, sacrificed thousands upon thousands of children to Molech and Baal. They threw them into the yawning maw of a huge bronze image of Molech, in whose belly blazed a terrible fire. And these little ones were offered up to appease Molech and to bring favour on land and crops. And Israel became part of this deception also, that a child had to be sacrificed for the welfare of land and people. Today's self-righteous would rightly describe these practices as primitive, ignorant, and abhorrent, whilst at the same time endorsing the brutal ending of the lives of millions of babies by abortion on demand to the gods of today, gods called convenience and expediency. The first is called barbaric, whilst the second is endorsed as humane and dressed up in euphemisms that don't confront or offend, like women's health care, Planned Parenthood, women's reproductive rights, and even selective reproduction. Yet behind both the old and the new deception is the crafty, evil, and laughing mind of the enemy of all life. On the one hand, persuading people of another age that the gods they'd created for themselves with their own hands required these acts to gain their favour. And on the other, persuading today's generation that it's not really life that they are snuffing out. In one case, children sacrificed on the altar of superstition and fear, and the other sacrificed on the altar of convenience and expediency. In falling for gross deceptions, where is the evolutionary improvement? We still lie, distort, cheat, envy and slander, and commit character assassination. There's not a child born who has to be trained and educated into the fine arts of lying, cheating, envying, or appropriating what is not theirs. And it's only by the grace of God that there has been technological and medical advancement, and yet even these have often been marred by the smudge of human ambition and manipulative agendas, deceit and cheating. There's not one scintilla of evidence of moral improvement, as the multiplication of so-called reforms by our parliamentarians who believe they're making the world a better place bears witness. We still hate, we still disparage, demean, take advantage, falsify, cheat, posture and virtue signal, as any 10-minute session on social media platforms will attest. Actually, does not the evolutionary theory itself mitigate against moral improvement or even altruism in selecting for self-centeredness and advantage taking? That's how it works, isn't it? The most cunning, the smartest, the quickest, the strongest and the fittest survive. But they do so by taking advantage of the weaker and more dispensable. So how can both positions be held? On the one hand, the belief that humankind is climbing toward functional and moral perfection, and yet on the other, that self-centeredness and self-preservation are the means by which we arrive at this. That sounds like moral bankruptcy to me. And the peddlers of such confused rhetoric are avoiding the obvious, the ground zero truth, which we sinners of every age are at pains to avoid. The biblical truth of Romans 3:23, that all have sinned and have fallen short of the glory of God. Yes, there have been sins of the strong against the weak or the disempowered that we can look at with self-righteous indignation. But any school playground, or for that matter business enterprise or academic institution, discloses the same sins as current. However, the exploitative sin of the stronger can never mean that the weaker, or what we call the victim, is without sin, as is often implied, or that the weaker has never sinned against or taken advantage of those weaker again. An Australian Aboriginal pastor who'd grown up under an uncle and learned to despise white people came to a dramatic realization when he met the Lord. He needed to go to white people he knew and ask them to forgive his heart of hatred toward them. Until he met the Lord, he'd only seen himself as victim, but now he saw his own sin and failure. All have sinned can only mean that the only one who can judge correctly is indeed the one who has not sinned, and there's only one of them, the one who said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." The real message for today's woke and self-righteous revisionists and moralists is, we all have sinned, as Isaiah said. All we, like sheep, have gone astray and have turned everyone to his own way. And God is looking into every heart, that of both victim or imagined victim, and that of the oppressor or imagined oppressor. But God finds that each is infected with the same disease. We're conditioned to view sin as relative, yet Jesus removed that distinction by showing that what we indulge privately and within is the same as committing the sin outwardly. The actual adultery or the actual murder is but the fruit of what began as a thought and a desire in the heart. the new era of imagined human righteousness, of wokeness, intent on correcting evils of past sinful humans, will of course prove to be no less sinful than any other generation. In fact, since self-righteousness, especially collective self-righteousness, is deeply offensive to God, it is likely to stink in his nostrils more than ever. Not to mention that the new, improved humanity, whilst censuring the past, is conveniently overlooking or euphemizing its own gross sins. Since we will all eventually stand before the truly righteous one, where everything will be exposed, it's far, far better to come before him now and to be clothed in his righteousness and be given a new and right heart. Amen.